And eventually we were baptized in Pretoria by that group called the Brenhamites. And we snuck out and left and went to Pretoria for the entire weekend. And we got baptized and we met amazing people. Coupled with that, you must remember at boarding school, it was during the upheaval of the struggles and Stephen Bantu Biko and the Black Consciousness movement and was very strong in those days. And it was fascinating, you know, to see everything unfold. And eventually, you know, our faith, even though started wobbly, one of the things I wanted to do was to leave this country and go far away. I used to admire people from overseas who came into the country, and we had friends who were Seventh-day Adventists, and we get a lot of African Americans who would come here. They spoke differently. It looked like their confidence level was something to appreciate, and I loved it, and I wanted to go to their country. So we'd motivate each other with David to say, one day we'll go. And because of our parents, when we came back from boarding school, we'll still go to the Dutch Reformed Church. But now with a different twist. You know, women were still high on our agenda because we're still finding ourselves, finding our feelings. What do you do when you're 17? Your hormones are running wild, you know. Every skirt is a potential opportunity, and we wanted to seize the opportunity. We were young, ignorant. The world was our oyster, and we wanted to conquer it. And I remember we used to go to the airport, and we used to go to the airport and would sit at the airport and would watch planes come in and planes go out. Every single Sunday after church, we'll go to the airport, and we used to share with each other, say, one day, plane leaving this country. You know, somebody once said when they speak about a vision, they said, vision, it is applied imagination. You know, you gain through the strengths of your vision, the power to shape the future. And one of the things that they talk about when they speak about vision is that it's the ability to see. So we had to conceptualize our future and see it the way we saw it. And we had to come back to work a plan to make sure that future became a reality. So every Sunday, it was a routine. Go to the airport, come back, and because my mother was working for white people, and my granny was home. She's the one who really, literally brought me up, and she would force us to go to school and say, education is the key to freedom, though I didn't understand how Bantu education at the time could be the key to freedom. But we came to understand that, you know, you can be born in a township, you can live in the township, but through a book you can travel the world, and through a book you can dine with the greats of the world. So what did I do? I started to love books. I started to love reading, purely because it looked like it was a way to escape the misery that I found myself in. So eventually, cut long stories short, we left the country, went abroad, and got on that flight, and destined for a country that I didn't know. I was at the time literally turning 18 years old, finishing 18, turning 19, and there I was, bound for the US for a place called Huntsville, Alabama. I don't know if you know the US, it's in the deep South, and racism was still practiced. It was not a place for me. I wanted to go to a place called Los Angeles because I'd seen it. It looks like this is where action was taking place. And I remember our first landing before we went to Huntsville was actually in Los Angeles, and the guy who was supposed to pick us up never picked us up. So our first night in the US was on a bus bench, and in front of me there was a sign written UCLA, University of California at Los Angeles, and I told myself one day I'm going to graduate from that institution. We would leave that place and would go to the beach, and there's a guy who worked at the Flosham Shoe who took our bags and put them underneath. Eventually went to Huntsville, Alabama. I didn't like it, took a bus for 3 days, came back to LA, was picked up by a lady named Mrs. Butler who had 5 kids with 5 different fathers. And there was a young man, one of the children was Quincy, and Quincy was a drug addict, and I never understood what it meant to be a drug addict. I used to work my butt off. I used to literally wake up in the wee hours of the morning, clean the house. She taught me how to drive. And I'd literally take a bus to a place called Los Angeles City College, and I'd get there, and we were hustlers. You know, I met Lebo M there, I met Ron Kunene, and we started a musical group called Temba, which is a Zulu word for hope, as you know. And we started singing at different places, at different churches, and I became, I developed a desire to know who God was, because I believe strongly that without God you could accomplish absolutely nothing. And in my medley of going through life, I wanted to know who God was. And I started to go into different churches. African Americans have a different style of preaching. And I just loved the way they presented the gospel. They were studious, they were academic. Some of them were intellectuals. And I felt, man, this is the way to go. You have to study. And I decided that's what I'm going to do. So I got a scholarship. I went to a place called UCLA, that institution. I went there, I got a scholarship from the United Nations. I graduated in political science and economics. And you should have seen me when I graduated. I wish my parents were there. Unfortunately, I could not fly them. I couldn't afford them. The only people I could invite was Mrs. Butler and her kids, and they came. And when my name was called, about 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people were graduating that day. But when my name was called, you know, it's a short distance between where I am and to the podium to receive my certificate. And the only people who could really shout loudest was Mrs. Butler and the other guys that I've invited. I was dressed up, suited up in a tie. Every single person saw a finished product, but nobody had to see the struggles that I had to endure, the sleepless nights I had. I became a security guard. I drove a cab. I slept in funny places. I changed my name and to be called something else. It's incredible the hustle that you do. And we did it to survive. I worked at Wendy's, I worked at McDonald's, just to put money in my pocket and just to have a decent thing. So eventually when I finished graduating, at the time, you won't believe it, I worked on a show called A Different World for Bill Cosby. He's not going through such a great time now, but I worked for him. He started a show called A Different World, and I worked on A Different World. I worked with Lebo on Dry White Season, on Cry Freedom, and it's incredible. But my joy was working on A Different World behind the scenes, because I understood the dynamics of TV and how it works. And it was an invaluable lesson. I didn't go there to work there, but I could pick up some dollars. I sold newspapers. The list is long.